Hey everyone, Catch 'em All Collectibles here with a 8 card regular tier. That's the $100 tier that recently opened. Return to show you. On the left side, you'll see a few labels. All 4 of those cards that were previously in those slabs are now included in this submission, and we will see what their grades are as we go. Just for information, anyone curious, I sent this on. Well, it arrived on January 4th. It was entered on January 7th, and then it was shipped back to me on January 26th. So right about 3 weeks. Right about 3 weeks to get this back at $100 a card. So PSA does seem to be opening up the new tiers only when they're ready to get them back in a reasonable time frame, which is props to them for that. Hopefully they'll continue rolling out the tiers very cautiously and slowly so that we don't run into too crazy of turnaround times for new cards going in. But yeah, first half of this video, I'm going to show you these 8 cards and give a little bit of a discussion on cracking. And the second half of the video, I'm going to discuss kind of my strategy for the year on what cards I'm going to send and when. So anyways, we'll start working through the cards. I went pretty heavily into these staff cards. I bought a lot of the sealed packs back when Vivid Voltage came out. If anyone remembers, early on, it wasn't known, but as of today, they have not yet created more staff stamps. Whether they're discontinued or whether they're retired entirely, I'm not entirely sure, but this Charizard and Lugia both came out of a sealed pack that I recently opened. I think upon release, I had bought about 12 for around $1,000 a piece, which ended up being a really good buy because they kind of bumped up a little bit on speculators buying them when the staff cards were mentioned to be discontinued. And I got in before that, which worked out well. I graded and sold quite a few kind of early out of the gates to garner those high prices. They've come down quite a bit since then, but the packs are also coming down themselves too. I've picked up a couple sealed packs. I still have a handful of them that I never opened from right when I bought them out of the gate. So you can't go wrong buying the sealed packs as long as you get a good price on them. Charizard, Lugia, Snorlax, Donphin. That's like an all-star lineup of for the 4 pre-release promos. So yeah, anyways, the Charizard got a 9. Lugia got a 10. Love to see that. And then I forget when I posted this, but I did post a send-off video for this, I believe, a few weeks ago. Kickstarter, full hollow Bigfoot. Bigfoot's my guy. I'm not into the whole Mothman is the Charizard of MetaZoo. I know Bigfoot. I think almost everybody in the world does, or at least in the US heavily. So he's my personal chase. It's perfectly fine and reasonable to not buy into what everyone else is going for. So yeah, Bigfoot's my guy. I also did pick up a sample card. I think I mentioned in the send-off, the back was a little rough, little off-center. I think the sample cards are a tough grade, so 8 is exactly what I would have expected. And I don't remember if I put specific grades on them when I showed them in the send-off, but 9 and 8, that's right in line with my expectations. So now we get into the cracked out cards. Some people aren't a huge fan of the thought of cracking out a card and grading. When it comes to the first 3, you'll see that they are CGC slabs. I guess I had that grade covered there. So these 3 cards, the 2 Burn Towers and the Grand Party Trainer Certification card, they were all originally graded with CGC. That was when those were graded at some point around when PSA was only grading for $300 plus. It was more than I was comfortable paying at the time. Now that PSA is getting cheaper, I was able to submit these at 100, especially given, I mean, that's a fairly strong 9 with 3 9 subgrades and a 9.5. It did, so this one is this one. It did go from a CGC 9 to a PSA 9. When I looked it over before I sent it off, I thought it had a shot at the 10, but I was pretty happy taking the PSA 9, and that's what it ended up getting. You'll see the next one I made out even better. I went from a 9.5, which had a 9.5 average, but centering was the lowest. I think out of everything, out of the 4 subgrades, I think centering is the best thing to have slightly low, because PSA is a bit more lenient on centering than CGC in my opinion. But yeah, getting back to when you crack a card out of a CGC case that has never been to PSA, I think it's completely unreasonable that anyone could have issue with that. It's like I graded it with one company in their scale and it hit a 9.5, and I decided to try it with the other company with their own scale and it hit a 10. I mean, there's really no way to take issue with that. There's really no way to think that that's like an immoral practice. And I guess the same goes for the next card. This Grand Party, I had a nice minty, apparently mint by CGC standards, but gem mint by PSA standards. So that card had been originally graded with CGC. I subsequently decided to crack it out and then send it to PSA. And you'll note here that this one had 3 extremely solid subgrades. So 3 gem mint subgrades, 9.5 centering, 9.5 corners, and then the 10 for the edges. It did have 8.5 surface. I looked it all over and I couldn't really see what they were looking at. To me, I felt pretty comfortable that this card had a solid shot of the 10, and then it did hit the 10. So I won't mention a name, but in the Discord for my Patreon, the Pokenomics that Jake and I run, there was a member who made a bit of a statement that he'd eat his left shoe if a vintage card could ever upgrade from a CGC 9 to a PSA 10. He didn't think it was possible, and I just kind of, the day that he said it, I said it's pretty silly. It's definitely going to happen when you're talking thousands of cards that are ultimately probably going to be cracked from CGC slabs to send to PSA. It's bound to happen eventually, and then it did. So I sent him this proof, and we'll see if he delivers and how he delivers. But you know who you are if you're watching. And so yeah, the next one is kind of an interesting thing too. People have this whole thing on CGC grades harder. I don't know whether that counts the 6X cert era or if that was only during the 4 certs, but I've always heard, see how old this label was? This was a 0 cert, very old grade. I mean, we're talking early 2000s, early mid 2000s. So I've always heard that, oh no, I only buy 4 certs or newer, they grade harder, all the old ones are really bad. I looked this card over all up and down. It was beautiful. It looked really, really clean to me. And you'll see here, it got the Gem Mint 10. So not only can a CGC 9 grow up one day to become a PSA 10, PSA 9s can too. Grading card companies are not, it's not like an absolute measurement, like weighing something on a scale. If you were to weigh this slab on a scale, it's going to have a set weight. And you could weigh it on 100 different scales, and it's going to have the same weight on all of them. A little bit of variation, especially if they're super cheap ones that aren't like calibrated or anything. If you take it up on a mountain, that's all getting into like atmospheric pressures and things like that. But I hope what I'm saying is understood in that a measurement like a weight or a measurement like the speed of something or a measurement of length, those are fixed absolute measurements with maybe slight variations just due to error in the measuring tool or in the measurement process. But grading a card is highly subjective. A 10 pounds is more than 9 pounds every time. A 10 grade and a 9 grade aren't two distinct, absolute, separate measurements, really. They have a lot of overlap, significantly more than I think people would realize. So I'm going to make a separate video on this at some point down the line, but I'm getting up towards 10 minutes now, and I've got a little bit to show after I pause here. But yeah, I'll continue the discussion a little bit for this video. Well, I'll save the discussion for a later date on the difference between grades and the grading scales and all that. But anyways, these are the cards that I got back. 8 cards. You can see I made out really well. And this was my entire submission. I didn't crack 50 cards for this submission and then just show you the best 4. I mean, if you look at the certain numbers here, if you pause the video and you go back through, nothing's being hidden. These are the 4 cards. So I had one tie, 9 to 9, a 9.5 to a 10, and then a 9 to a 10 and a 9 to a 10. Though I'm not showing, like, I'm not omitting any failures, there is a selection bias in that clearly, if this CGC 9 was like a weak example and I didn't think it was going to get a PSA 9 or have a shot of the PSA 10, I clearly wouldn't have cracked it. So there's clearly a selection bias. I have several grand parties right now graded. I would have sold this as a CGC 9 if I thought it was going to be a CGC 9, and especially have no shot of the 10. Like, I have another one here that I recently bought. This one, to me, is a bit weaker. Yeah, this one you can see averaged, this one averaged over a 9. This one is like a 9 flat average. It's got 2 9s, a 9.5, and 8. This one would probably be a PSA 9, but it would have no shot at the 10. And potentially it could have the shot at going down to a PSA 8. So, like, I went 4 for 4, either, well, 1 staying the same, 3 out of 4 upgraded. Selection bias, because I wasn't going to crack one that was going to be likely to go down or at best stay the same. All these had a shot at going up in my mind, so that's why I went ahead with them. Anyways, we're at 11.5 minutes. I will catch you over at the spreadsheet where I'll talk a little bit about, I mentioned it early in the video, where we stand in grading, what my strategy is for the year on submitting, what I'm going to submit and when. So yeah, I will catch you over at the computer. So I just wanted to quickly show this was the entire return that you just saw. As I mentioned, there was a selection bias in choosing the 4 cards that I broke out, but I didn't like break out 50 and only show 4. I just wanted to show that quickly. So the next thing I will show you. So I mentioned earlier the not really a challenge, but the statement someone made in the Patreon Discord. Just to shout out the Discord, which you can find linked below in the description in all my YouTube videos. This past Sunday, I gave a presentation on the state of PSA grading and kind of where it stands. Back in November, I also did a presentation in that, talking a lot about PSA just because a lot is going on with PSA. It's the most interesting, and I think it's one of the most relevant things to the hobby, just given how much value PSA can add to a card, whether I like it or not. But yeah, so I'm going to show you not the whole presentation. I go on long enough in my 10 to 30 minute YouTube videos. We had a 4-hour meeting this past Sunday, and we shoot for 3 every month. We usually stay there, but if needed to address everyone's questions and get all the good commentary in there, we'll go over when needed. But so yeah, this was one slide where I kind of summing up my take on the PSA situation, where we stand, what I'm going to use that to do. So these are our current open tiers. There are a couple higher than walkthrough, which you can see on their page. Basically, walkthrough gets you nearly a 1-day turnaround. The other ones do as well. They just go up to a higher value limit. But anyways, all the ones in this tan color, economy through walkthrough, are currently open. Although economy is not open completely to the public, it's open through lottery only and middleman. There was actually just a lottery an hour or so ago. I'm recording this on Tuesday. There was just a lottery that I secured 5 more cards to send at $50 a piece. But anyways, what this table is showing you is the value limit for each tier. And then if you were to submit a card that was worth exactly $9,999, so you wouldn't get upcharged, you'd be utilizing the full amount of the allowance for that tier. If you were to do that, paying $600 on a $10,000 card, you're paying 6% of the card's value to grade it. And then the percent high tier is like, what's the most you could or should be paying? I mean, theoretically, you could submit a $10 card for $600 and pay multiples of what the card is worth, right? But it's only reasonable that you're going to attempt to submit something between the $5,000 value and the $10,000 value. So if it's worth $5,000 in the walkthrough, that's 12% of the card's value. If it's worth 10,000 in the walkthrough, that's 6% of the card's value. And those hold steady for everywhere. Well, for everything from Super Express and walkthrough. For Express, it drops down to between 6 and 10% of the value. Regular and economy, we've got between 7 and 10 and 5 and 10%. So you can see that PSA, generally speaking, is trying to get somewhere in the vicinity of 5 to 10% of the card's value in these higher tiers. A note that I made, we did last month, or it's February now, we did in December of 2021, regular reopened. And when it reopened, they actually increased the value limit. When it had closed, it was $1,000 value limit. And when it reopened, it's $1,500 now. So one of the things I'm trying to preach here, I see a lot of people asking, when should I submit my cards? What should I be submitting? Preaching patience. If you have something that's worth 1,000 and above, you may as well submit it now. PSA is upcharging cards that should be upcharged, generally speaking. They miss a lot of things. They're not super consistent with it, but I think they're going to get better over time. I've had a lot of upcharges come through. I just watched an old school Pokemon return video 5 minutes before I started recording this, and he had a couple upcharges hit even on his $100 submission. So if you've got something that's worth in these value ranges, you may as well submit it now. A little bit of a caveat is that I think over time, as bulk opens, as lower than $50 per card tiers open, I do think they'll likely, as they relax this value limit from 1,000 to 1,500, I think we might see some of these bump up more slightly, but maybe not. It's hard to say. If you're grading for your personal collection, especially, again, if it's worth these amounts, you may as well send it now. But if you have a card that's worth significantly less than $1,000, if you have a card that's worth 500 or less, especially, patience is key. If it's a card that costs you raw $10 and you want to sell it for a few hundred, and $50 doesn't phase you. If you're doing it completely for like a quick flip, it's reasonable to pay the 50 and to get it sold. But if you're going to hold it long term, there's no reason to rush into it. PSA is going to be around for a long time. And I mentioned here that they're currently doing the lottery system for the $50 tier, and middlemen are open. Mid to late throughout the year, I do anticipate that they'll do somewhere in the $20 to $40 range. They'll start same way they've been doing it. They'll start doing the lottery if you're a member, and then they'll also open it for middlemen on a limited basis before the full public release. But the next slide that I'll get into will show you a little bit more about where the backlog is. It's something that I showed in a teaser video for the Patreon back in November. So I'll talk about that on the next slide a little bit more too. But some people say, well, my card's raw. I know what it's worth when it's graded, but it's not worth that when it's raw, and I don't know what grade it's going to get. So like this card ended up getting a 9. I think in the 9, it's going for anywhere wide range, somewhere between $500 and $1,000. If it hits a 10, it's over 1,000. So what I do is I submit assuming the card is going to get 1 to 2 grades lower than it might at best. So like this card I thought had a shot at a 10, but I don't want to submit it under the express tier if it's worth $2,500 in a 10 and then have it get a 9 and have paid $150 to grade a card that's only worth $600 or something. So what I do is I assume it's going to get an 8 or a 9, and then if and when it gets the 10, PSA will upcharge me, or maybe I'll get lucky and they'll miss the upcharge, even if it's over the $1,000 limit. That's kind of my own method. One little caveat again for that is if I submit it and I declare it as $500 and it were to get lost or damaged or destroyed while at PSA, they will not pay you out a higher insurance value than what you declared it at. So there is a little bit of a risk in doing that if you think the card will genuinely get a 10. If I was submitting, like, I don't have any, but if I had a raw base set first edition Charizard, PSA 8, it's about 10 grand. PSA 9, it's about 20. I mean, I'm not going to declare it still as a 10 and pay whatever tier would be required for a $300,000 card. but I might assume a 9. Whereas on a card like this, or even a burn tower or something like I showed you early in this video, I'm fine taking on a little bit of risk if it's assuming it's an 8, paying for that tier and then getting upcharged. The Charizard, that, like if I had a Charizard that had a shot at a PSA 10, I don't even have the tiers shown here, but I would probably pay one that had an estimated value of $50,000 or something and insure it for that 50, just in case it did hit the 10. But anyways, that's not something I'm going through right now. That's not something I have raw kicking around. And I do expect by late this year or early next year, I think we'll get back to where we have a $10 to $20 tier with a value limit of $500. That's something that we had as recently as 2020. I mean, even into early 2021, you could submit cards for less than $20 per card with up to a $500 value limit. And the nice thing about the bulk tier, you're only paying 2 to 4% of the value if you get a $500 value card for 10 to 20 bucks. So that's great to get the lower premium on that. So yeah, the next slide here, we've got a flashback to the Patreon preview that I showed you on my channel, and Jake also posted on his. So back then, I made a chart on how the backlog was created, where it ended up. Back in November, we were here. I kind of posed 3 scenarios. Worst case scenario, if PSA were to open too quickly, kind of a medium scenario, if PSA were to open semi-aggressively and or not scale to 20 million cards too quickly. In the best case scenario, which thankfully I can report as of today, there's about 6.3 million cards in the backlog. I know Nat recently did a Instagram live with somebody where he said it was around 6 million. So I think around 6 million, 6.3 by my calculations, using data from PSA. They're posting on their Instagram. So yeah, I was able to take the data that PSA posted on their Instagram of how many cards they've graded per month, and then use the fact that they're stating that 80% of their capacity is devoted to the backlog. And then it was just a simple math problem to go there. But anyways, we're tracking right now towards the best case scenario. And the best case scenario, I had them finishing the backlog by the end of the year, which is what Nat has also stated. So I'm hopeful that PSA can flush out all the cards from the backlog from anywhere between mid 2020. There's still some cards out there through middlemen, and all the way up to March 2021 was the last month that they were open at the bulk tier before they closed that down and have been closed since. So yeah, anyways, that's kind of my thoughts on where we are with grading, where we might end up. And as I said, especially if you're grading cards for your personal collection, patience. It's going to get cheaper. More tiers are going to open lower. And if you're grading for the flip, try to, I guess, pay as little as you can, but you've also got to consider the speed to get it back and get it to market. A lot more tricky when you're trying to play like the flip game. But I think that's everything. As I said, this video probably ended up being 20 or 25 minutes. I thought I could do it in 10 or 15, but I always go on. If you're interested in this type of thing, we're doing it every month in Patreon. Jake and I kind of alternate months. We've actually got some exciting guests that we're going to be compensating for their time, using some of the money that we get from the Patreon to bring on experts in other aspects of the hobby, other aspects of the field, to educate and to present to the Patreon members their own areas of expertise and interest. So really exciting things going on Patreon. Feel free to check out the link below, linked in my YouTube videos, if you want to join us over there. I push the limits here of what does well on YouTube. I already go on a bit, but I'm very limited in what I can do because I already go on long enough. In Patreon, we can really, with that 3-4 hour time block, we can get deep into the details. I only showed you just 2 slides of the 12 slide presentation that I had, and I showed 2 of the more like basic ones. The other ones were a bit more detailed and a lot of stuff to dive into. So yeah, anyways, I've gone on long enough. I appreciate everyone who watched. I appreciate everyone who checks out that link and joins us over on Patreon. I will catch you all later.